Singlehood is a lifestyle that only a few willingly venture into. But to be truly single means accepting the fact that being alone is not what it is about, but standing alone with the help of others. This is something that Young-ho and Hyun-jin learn throughout the movie. Jin-pyo, the president of the publishing company, calls his staff for an emergency meeting. Lately, they have been having problems with their writers, who seem to have been plagued with the disease called irony. The author of the book Health First gets sick, the lawyer who wrote Easy Law gets scammed, the author of Love Being Alone gets pregnant, and so on. Basically, most of their writers are not available for work. Their headliner, Ms. Hong Mina, is free, but they need at least one more. They are planning to publish a series of books that contain essays discussing the single life while living in major cities. Ms. Hong is in Barcelona, and they need one to write from Seoul, so Jin-pyo needs to find someone who can meet their demands. Enter the dashing Park Young-ho, a college instructor who teaches writing. An eligible bachelor who teaches his students well, is conscious of his work time, and enjoys his time alone. He also likes to take artsy pictures and post them on his social media account, garnering him hundreds of thousands of followers. Young-ho perfectly fits Jin-pyo's criteria for a writer, so he shows Young-ho's social media to his editors. Of course, he already has an idea about Young-ho's writing skills, so he's convincing the team that the college instructor is the best writer for their series. Hyun-jin, the editor-in-chief, is skeptical at first. She says out loud her negative impressions of Young-ho simply based on his social media content. Unfortunately, Young-ho hears her comments. So, to resolve things peacefully, Jin-pyo asks Young-ho and Hyun-jin to discuss matters privately. As it happens, Young-ho and Hyun-jin used to be schoolmates, with Young-ho just a year older. He claims he doesn't remember Hyun-jin, even though the latter recognizes him. Things don't get better when Hyun-jin straight up tells Young-ho that they've chosen him as a substitute writer. He has the skills and the following. Therefore, he's the best candidate for the job. This hurts Young-ho's ego, aside from the fact that he thinks Hyun-jin is hard to work with. Later, Jin-pyo tries to reason with him. He really thinks Young-ho is best suited for the job. He also persuades him that despite Hyun-jin's frank nature, she's a very competent editor. After a lot of thinking, Young-ho finally accepts the job. He meets Hyun-jin in a cafe to discuss the contract and the publishing plan. Hyun-jin explains that what he'll write will be part of a series that discusses singlehood. In their essays, they have to write intuitively about the different aspects of being single, while still employing their own writing styles. She adds that the other writer for the series, Ms. Hong, is in Barcelona, and has been briefed about the plan. Young-ho is okay about it, except for one thing. In the plan, Hyun-jin has changed the phrase, "It's good to be alone," to "It's okay to be alone." Young-ho doesn't agree with this because saying it's okay implies being single is a consolation. It doesn't sit right with him, who strongly believes that singlehood is the way of life. He believes people can live with minimal relationships, and that a person needs to be alone to bloom. He reiterates that it's true that it's good to be alone. However, Hyun-jin has a different view. She thinks that it's more like a twisted truth than a fact. Young-ho is appalled by this, and accuses her of being a dictator, forcing him to change his views. Hyun-jin relents in the end to avoid arguments. She gives him the contract, and after a few back and forths between them, Young-ho finally signs it. After their meeting, Hyun-jin offers to drive him home. Young-ho is grateful, but after seeing the state of her car, he thinks twice. He even attempts to wipe the dashboard, while lecturing her about the importance of cleanliness and neatness. She tells him she has a way of organizing things, so he shouldn't criticize her. But that's unbelievable, he says, especially after seeing discarded orange peels, which she may have used as a car freshener. On their way, she tells him she knows that he lied about not knowing her. She's sure of it because Young-ho talks to her like he's known her before, but Young-ho keeps quiet. In the next scene, we see Hyun-jin visiting a bookstore. This bookstore is one of the major retailers for their publishing company. Part of Hyun-jin's job is to check how their books are doing, and what other books are on the bestseller list. But, in addition to her job, she has a secret agenda. And that is, to have at least a brief interaction with the current apple of her eye, Sunwoo, the bookstore's manager. Seeing Sunwoo greet Hyun-jin, one can't blame her for being infatuated. The man looks clean and dignified, and has a smooth way with his words. He even teases her to treat him to a cup of coffee for giving a good review of one of their books. Hyun-jin feels fluttering in her stomach, as she inwardly gushes about how cute the man is. Later, she visits her good friend Kyung-ah, who happens to be Jin-pyo's wife, and relays the romance she felt while talking to Sunwoo. You see, Hyun-jin is a hopeless romantic, and has always yearned to be in a relationship. But Kyung-ah gives her friend a reality check, and for a good reason. Hyun-jin is already going overboard with her romantic fantasies. Kyung-ah reminds her of the many instances in which she thought she was in love, only to be proven wrong in the end. She loves the idea of being in love, but she forgets the practicalities and boundaries that are important in a relationship. She also doesn't give herself the chance to get to know the men in her life. Hyun-jin doesn't react to her friend's observations, mainly because they are all true, and she's just being stubborn. They also talk about Young-ho accepting a contract to write a book. Hyun-jin asks if Jin-pyo has always known Young-ho, based on their interactions from earlier. Kyung-ah says her husband may have known him from their alumni gatherings. Meanwhile, Young-ho contemplates the publishing plan when a colleague looks over and finds his contract. He teases Young-ho and wishes him luck. Young-ho asks him not to tell their director, but it's too late. The director greets him and gives him a proud pat on the shoulder. It's not that Young-ho doesn't appreciate his colleagues' well wishes. He's not exactly antisocial. It's just that he doesn't see the point of sharing good things about his life because he believes he's all good on his own. That night, he finally starts writing the draft of his book. The general thought of his first draft is that since people are always surrounded by others at work, school, or at home, they always need to fulfill a certain role that fits others. They don't get the chance to be alone, and thus, they don't get the chance to be themselves. And this is one of the reasons why people's stress is elevated. To avoid this, the best solution is singlehood. Upon reading this, Hyun-jin rolls her eyes. Young-ho's writing is too resolute instead of being intuitive. It's like he is preaching that singlehood is the best way of life, instead of simply describing it in relation to how people live in Seoul. When Hyun-jin asks for Ms. Hong's draft, her fellow editor gives her a copy. As she reads it, she nods her head in approval and appreciation. Ms. Hong's writing is catchy and easy to read, as opposed to Young-ho's straightforward approach. As an editor, it's a great dilemma to reconcile the different tones of the writers to create a cohesive series. When she asks Jin-pyo for any advice, he suggests they should write about their first love to add some perspective. He is sure that Young-ho has experienced it before. She pitches this idea to Young-ho, who immediately dismisses it. Young-ho is visiting some tourist spots in Seoul to take pictures that will be used in his book, and Hyun-jin is accompanying him. He tells her that first love is not funny. He asks why people even rave about it when perhaps they're not someone's first love. She argues that it's another reason why he should write about his own experience, so people can relate. He is still not convinced. He says that her telling him to write about love is like telling a vegetarian to eat meat. She argues again that, just as there's a reason for someone to choose to become a vegetarian, there must be a reason why he chose the single life. Annoyed, Young-ho recounts to her the many instances where women broke up with him, implying that he became disillusioned with love. He insists there's no such thing as his first love. Still, Hyun-jin thinks it exists. She tells him Jin-pyo knows about it, which makes Young-ho resign. However, that night he contemplates his conversation with Hyun-jin, and then he finds himself relating that moment in his life. Young-ho was taking Korean literature when he was in college. To support himself, he applied for a part-time job as a hotel employee. There, he met Ju-ok. She was also a college student. Young-ho thought she was assertive, which made her more attractive in his eyes. Whenever there was a chance, Young-ho would escape to the laundry room to read his favorite book, Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. One time, Ju-ok accidentally found him there. Her ice cream dripped on the pages of the book, which she promptly wiped. At first, Young-ho was shy about Ju-ok finding out his hobby, but soon he realized they shared the same love for literary works. They slowly grew closer as the days passed. He fell for her until he realized he loved her free spirit and confidence. On Ju-ok's birthday, he told her he loved her. And then, they shared their first kiss. Young-ho seems to be the naive college student who fell for a free-spirited girl in his recollections. As he finishes his draft, he thinks it should be enough to fulfill Hyun-jin's request. However, he gets a call from her later, asking him about the rest of the story. What happened after their first kiss? What happened to Ju-ok? Young-ho wants to ignore Hyun-jin, but she is insistent. In the end, he gives in to her request. He finds it amusing that his writing made her curious about what happens next. And so, Young-ho continues his recollections of his first love. Young-ho and Ju-ok had started living together. One time, he asked her to review an essay that he planned to submit to a literary contest. She obliged, but she seemed half-hearted as she read it. Then he heard a soft meowing from outside the window. It came from the stray cat that he fed often. Ju-ok told him to stop feeding the cat, but Young-ho was happy to give it food. In the next scene, Young-ho is waiting for Ju-ok outside the hotel. She looked annoyed when she found him there. He told her they were supposed to watch a movie that night. but she said she forgot and told him she was attending a staff dinner. Then she told him they'd talk when she got home and simply left him there. However, she never returned. For days, Young-ho kept waiting for Ju-ok, without knowing what had happened to her or her reason for not returning. One day, he returned to the hotel, where they both had a part-time job. The head of the staff told him shocking news: Hong Ju-ok had quit a while ago. Young-ho was devastated. He tried to find love again, but every time, it felt like he was back at square one. Then he had a eureka moment. What if he was not meant to have a relationship? What if he chose to have a single life? The universe helped those who spent for themselves. And so, Young-ho starts his journey of self-love. Using his online shopping points accumulated from buying gifts, he bought himself new clothes and shoes and started to do things for himself. He became used to eating alone, walking alone, and watching movies alone. He started to believe that his efforts for himself would never let him down. Young-ho ends his recollection by stating that in being alone, one can understand more about one's own tastes, emotions, likes, and dislikes. Every day is a new day to discover something about oneself. So, he challenges those who are in a relationship. When was the last time they felt excited for themselves? A few days later, Young-ho receives a call from Hyun-jin. She tells him that their meeting will be pushed back an hour because she's in the middle of house hunting. He doubts if she'll be able to find a suitable home in just an hour, so he asks for her location. Later, he finds her in the middle of a bargain with the realtor. Young-ho intuitively knows that she will eventually accept whatever the realtor presents to her because that is who she is. A little naive about some things. Without knowing it, he gives her tips and pointers on how to choose her next apartment. And to make sure that she won't get lost, he accompanies her to the next location. All the while, he reminds her of the importance of daylight, water pressure, and transportation when considering a suitable apartment. He also gives her some security tips. Hyun-jin follows his lead and is appreciative of his gesture. After a full day of looking into apartments, Hyun-jin drives Young-ho home. She asks him if he can spare her a pair of shoes he doesn't wear, to make it look like she's not alone in her apartment. Young-ho says he doesn't have a pair to spare, but later, he checks his closet to choose which pair of shoes he'll give to his editor, indicating that he cares for her well-being more than he lets on. Soon, Hyun-jin finally moves into her chosen apartment. When she visits the bookstore again, she is surprised that Sunwoo knows about her move. He gives her 2 matching mugs as housewarming gifts. Of course, this sends her heart into overdrive, thinking he has romantic feelings for her and is concerned for her welfare. She goes to Kyung-ah and proudly shows her the mugs. Kyung-ah is not convinced. She crushes Hyun-jin's fantasies by suggesting more practical and realistic scenarios. Then she asks about how she found her apartment. Hyun-jin tells her about how Young-ho helped her. She even praises him for the tips and reminders he gave her. Instantly, Kyung-ah knows there's something going on. She claims Young-ho may be interested in Hyun-jin, but the latter denies this, saying he's only interested in himself. In the next scene, we see Young-ho attending the editor's meeting regarding his book. Hyun-jin is facilitating the meeting, and in there, he witnesses her other side. He realizes that Jinpyo is right. Hyun-jin is indeed competent in her task, given that she knows what she's talking about in regard to book covers and book recommendations. After tackling important points, she ends the meeting. One of the editors reminds her of the staff dinner that night. Hyun-jin invites Young-ho to attend. It's as casual as possible, taking place in a Samgyeopsal restaurant. At first, Young-ho is reserved, especially with the aggressive way one of the editors mixes their drinks. After a couple of glasses later, he gets comfortable, while Hyun-jin is tipsy. He helps her open her beer, which makes her remark how lousy she is with everything except for publishing. Then she asks him why he wants to be a writer. Although surprised by the sudden question, Young-ho tells her he's always wanted to write. He thinks this time is the best opportunity to do so. Hyun-jin smiles and says that new writers really have that initial optimism about their books. But after publishing, they were surprised because it didn't sell well. It's good that writers do their best, but anything can happen in publishing. He asks her why she's working hard if she knows anything can happen. She tells of that one instance when she saw someone on the subway, reading a book she published. She felt so proud back then, and it fueled her desire to publish a good book. That's why she's working hard. Young-ho asks what a good book is for her. She answers a book that sells well. Royalties don't grow on trees, and indeed, it's true. They continue their conversation, while the other editors are also having their own, mainly ganging up on the youngest, since that's the work culture they are used to. They have another toast, but Hyun-jin almost chokes on her glass upon seeing the couple who enter the restaurant. It's Sunwoo, and he's with a woman who looks a lot like his girlfriend. She immediately ducks, afraid that Sunwoo may have seen her. Then she crawls towards the restroom. Young-ho notices all of this and follows his editor. Hyunjin is so frantic that she doesn't notice she has entered the men's restroom. Young-ho asks if she knows the couple who just arrived. Hyunjin has no choice but to admit that Sunwoo is her crush. She sent him a text encouraging him to ask her out, and even wrote to him, "None but the brave deserve the fair." Young-ho laughs out loud at Hyunjin's delusions. Eventually, he helps her get out. They almost get caught when Sunwoo comes to the counter and orders kimchi. Thankfully, Young-ho quickly gives him a bag of kimchi and gestures for him to move along. Then, Young-ho grabs Hyunjin's hand, and they run away from the restaurant. After they have run for some distance, they finally stop, giggling with each other. Hyunjin points out how they look like a couple in romantic movies, which makes them notice that they're still holding hands. Things get a bit awkward when they let go of each other. She then tells him more details about Sunwoo. She says she feels embarrassed for assuming that he likes her just because of the mugs. She even declares that meaningless kindness should be a crime, to which Young-ho agrees. This is that rare moment when they don't get under each other's skin, and they are just talking like old friends. As they cross the road, someone calls Young-ho on the phone. After answering it briefly, he was surprised to see Hyunjin on his feet. Apparently she's tying his shoelaces. She says she can make a tie that can't be undone. He also crouches to stop her, and that's when they pause to get a good look at each other. It is Young-ho who starts getting closer to her. Then, one of Hyunjin's editors calls out her name, asking for the company card to pay for their meal. She pushes Young-ho aside, pretends nothing happened, and answers back that it's with Yeri, their colleague. The editor runs back to the restaurant. Young-ho gets up. The initial awkwardness becomes more tense, as they realize what they were about to do had they not been interrupted. A taxi drives by, and stuttering, he tells Hyunjin to get inside so she can go home, and that's the end of that eventful night. Back in his apartment, Young-ho sends Hyunjin a message, saying he enjoyed the night. Then he looks at her picture. He smiles as he realizes his editor is dependable, despite her cute and innocent looks. He catches himself in the mirror smiling idly, and he suddenly stands up. He is shocked to understand the direction of his thoughts and feelings. He reminds himself that to singles, flings are mere indulgences. He decides to write to distract himself. Days later, the editor's team received drafts from both Young-ho and Ms. Hong, along with the pictures they've taken for their respective books. One of them remarks how unusual it is for Ms. Hong to stick to the schedule. Meanwhile, another wonders why Young-ho has been ghosting them since that staff dinner. They look at his latest post, which makes them all concerned. It's a picture of his shoe rack, with the caption, "All ties can be undone." They think he's having writer's block, so one of them should visit him. They unanimously vote for Hyunjin for the task. That night, Young-ho gets a visit from Hyunjin. His cat alerts him first, which makes him panic, because this is the first time someone even thought of visiting him. He runs around making sure to put things in their places. He opens the door, a little out of breath, and greets her coolly. She says she's there as part of the writer management activity. She gives him the bag of food and then attempts to enter his apartment. But he stops her and bluntly tells her to leave. She doesn't take offense at this. Instead, she says okay and leaves. Relieved, Young-ho decides to smoke outside on his veranda. As he closes the door, the mop falls at a perfect angle, accidentally locking him out. He has no choice but to call back Hyunjin to help him. Of course, Hyunjin likes this because it gives her a chance to have a look at his private life. A bit nosy, but all in the name of writer management. She discovers that all the furniture in his apartment caters to his single life. There's only one sofa, one bedroom, one chair, one table, and even one mug. If she has to drink coffee, she has to drink it from his only bowl. So she asks for a glass of wine since she knows he has a collection. She proceeds to inquire about his cat and his impressive collection of vinyl records. She asks if he can play a classic one, to which he obliges. The two of them sit beside the window and talk about what happened that night. Hyunjin starts the conversation by asking Young-ho if he remembers. He tries to deny it, but he looks so awkward, and she can see through his bluff. She can't explain it, but she feels courageous. Mind you, she's not drunk. Unlike that night, she directly asks him if he intends to remain single for a long time. What if a perfect match comes along? He says he's the perfect match for himself, and that's that, she counters. How does he know when he has never tried matching with others? He asks if he should try to know, to which she says he should. Then they both became quiet. There's that tension again, the same one they felt that night. Hyunjin becomes bold. She holds Young-ho's arm, and he doesn't pull away. The next thing they know, they are sharing their first kiss, with the city lights serving as their background. A few days later, Hyunjin still feels dreamy about the kiss. The day is going well, especially now that they have the completed drafts from Young-ho and Ms. Hong for their Single in the City series. They already have the initial formatted version, which will be reviewed for approval. One of the editors, who has closely reviewed both of the author's works, has remarked how similar Ms. Hong's writing is to Young-ho's. This makes Hyunjin curious, prompting her to read Ms. Hong's work. Indeed, there are some striking similarities between the two authors' works, especially in the part narrating their respective first love. Feeling that something is going on, Hyunjin meets with Jinpyo. With him is the elusive Ms. Hong Mina, who finally decides to reveal herself. Unbeknownst to the three of them, Young-ho is walking towards the cafeteria. Upon seeing Hyunjin, he smiles. He intends to give her a pair of his shoes for her apartment, but his smile fades when he recognizes the woman sitting with Jinpyo and Hyunjin. As it turns out, Hong Mina is the same Juok who broke Young-ho's heart all those years ago. What happens next is a closed meeting that's palpable with tension. The other editors try to eavesdrop, as they rarely get the chance to witness such drama. Inside the room, Young-ho controls his rage with great effort, Mina remains nonchalant, and Jinpyo and Hyunjin look tense. Young-ho is reading Mina's draft. Certainly, there are some differences in how she told the story in her draft, but in essence, it's the same story of first love. In Mina's version, she's the one reading the Murakami book while Young-ho reads a comic book. She's free-spirited, but a little bit more reserved than his version. She's the one who checks his literary entry, while he's the one who is lukewarm towards his own work. She's also the one feeding the cat. In Mina's version, she mentions that her first love had no money and wasn't thoughtful, that he thought he knew and did things for her, but never really knew what she wanted. She says she tolerated this because she was in her 20s and didn't know any better. She admits she was clumsy because she didn't know much about herself. It's the same story of first love, only told from different perspectives, but in the end, both parties get the same heartache. Young-ho is riled up by the discrepancies. He demands that Mina edit her story, but she defends it, saying everything that happened between them is relative. Hyunjin chimes in for the first time. She asks Mina if she can consider editing her part. Still, Mina stands her ground. This is her first love from her perspective, and she has put a lot of effort into writing it. Her heartache from her experience is the fuel for the story. She scoffs a little at Young-ho when she points out the irony of hiding his pain while still aiming to be a writer. Jinpyo does his best to de-escalate the situation. He diverts his attention to other things, like the marketing strategy for their series. He says it will generate good publicity if they mention that the authors were ex-lovers years ago and fatefully met as colleagues in writing the series. At this, Young-ho looks at him. It finally dawns on him that Jinpyo may have known Mina's identity all along, and that he chose him for this exact reason. Feeling betrayed, he walks out of the room. Hyunjin follows him and tries to reason with him, but she cannot fault him for feeling betrayed. After reading Mina's draft, he understands that his pain is being used for selfish reasons. He even accuses Hyunjin of being incompetent for not knowing anything. But Hyunjin truly doesn't know, and only made the connection after reading both drafts. He declares that he's not going to publish his book anymore. She finds this unfair, as all their efforts will have gone to waste. She questions what kind of author he is, for dropping his work just because he doesn't like what the other author has written. But that's not his issue, he says. It's his feelings. And with that, he leaves. Hyunjin is still bothered late that night. She decides to visit her father to distract herself, but she meets his fiancé instead. After being single for so long, Hyunjin's father finally found someone he's compatible with. She's okay with the fiancé, who, as Hyunjin learns, has also been single for a long time. She asks the fiancé why she gave up the freedom and comfort of being single to be in a relationship. The fiancé answers that she didn't give up anything. Rather, she met someone with whom she could be free and comfortable, and Hyunjin understands that this makes all the difference. Despite all the drama that had happened in that meeting, Jinpyo still proceeds with the marketing stage of the book series. Mina and Young-ho are supposed to appear in a radio interview, but Young-ho refuses to be a part of their plans, so it's only Mina who gets interviewed by the radio host. In this interview, she finally reveals something regarding a pivotal point in her first love story. When asked why she left the relationship, she admits that she was afraid. Her first love, despite his flaws, was willing to put everything on the line for both of their futures. And she was afraid of becoming another person's responsibility. That's why she left. She also reveals, despite Hyunjin's and Jinpyo's warnings, that her meeting with her co-author Park Young-ho was not coincidental. It has been suggested by Jinpyo since the start and she thought it'd be a good way to help her ex get his closure. Young-ho has heard the radio interview. He doesn't know what he's supposed to feel about it. He receives a call from Hyun-jin. She tells him he's free to not publish his book. She won't work with a writer whose pride can't accept the fact that his ex is trying to help him. She also tells him that his pride keeps him from seeing her and the other editors who have worked hard to polish his book. Young-ho is unsure after this. He opens his secret bookshelf, where he's hidden a lot of books and memories. He gets his copy of Norwegian Wood to look for the ice cream smudge, but it isn't there. Then he gets a comic book, and that's where he finds the evidence. The reminder that once in his life, he fell in love and treasured the moments. Whoever's version is correct doesn't matter, because there's only one truth: that he loved and had his heart broken, and being single is his way to protect himself from being broken again. He takes a lot of time thinking about things. Eventually, he attends the book concert organized by the publishing company. In there, the author reads passages from his book and answers questions from his readers. But Young-ho's not there to listen or ask questions. He's there to talk to Hyun-jin. He tries to get her attention by raising his hand. However, the facilitator mistakes him for wanting to ask a question. To avoid becoming more embarrassed, he asks an important question. Does the writer ever feel embarrassed or regret what he wrote? The writer says there were times he felt embarrassed, but he never regretted what he wrote. Writing contains traces of his love, and, thus, pieces of himself. This wisdom is like the last plug pulled out to free his mind and emotions. He realizes it's time for him to move on. After the book concert, Hyun-jin meets him to thank him for what happened earlier. Then, Young-ho tells her that he's decided to continue publishing his book. In the chapter writer's notes, he writes how ironic it is that while writing about being alone, he thought more about relationships. He redefines being single by saying accepting help from others is what truly helps someone in being alone. Meanwhile, Hyun-jin also receives Mina's edited draft. She commends her ex for finding peace in living by himself. Eventually, the books get published and released to the market. Although they garner average ratings from the public, everyone involved in this project has chosen their own path. Young-ho makes sure to see Mina before her flight back to Barcelona. They don't need to have formal apologies, because they have made peace with their past. They hug each other, for old time's sake. A few months later, Young-ho visits Jinpyo in the cafe bookstore owned by his wife Kyung-ah. He has resigned from his position and has named Hyun-jin as his successor. Young-ho also finds out that she's written her own book. Instead of visiting her in the office, he is frequenting the bookstore where she would visit. And then, finally, she comes. Hyun-jin is pleasantly surprised to see him. They walk towards the park near the river, where he hands her his first novel. This is a great undertaking on his part, and she's proud of him for trying and changing. She offers to drive him to the bus stop. However, he invites her to have some beer and chicken. This time, he wholeheartedly accepts that he won't be alone, both in his journey as a writer and in love.